She chose the guy who treats her like garbage. Again, the gentle man gets let's be friends. The toxic one gets her obsession. This isn't about bad choices. It's about brain chemistry you can't control. The pattern. Have you ever watched this play out, maybe in your own life, maybe with someone you care about? The woman who says she wants kindness, stability, respect, but keeps choosing the guy who gives her chaos. The reliable man gets told he's like a brother. The unpredictable one gets the late-night texts and second chances. It's easy to get angry, to think women don't know what they want, to assume it's all just bad judgment. But what if I told you this isn't a choice at all? What if this attraction is a deep-seated psychological and neurochemical response that most people don't even know is controlling them? A response hardwired by childhood, amplified by brain chemistry, and nearly impossible to resist without understanding what's really happening. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. We're going into the evolutionary wiring, the childhood blueprints, and the addictive chemistry that explains this maddening dynamic. And by the end, you'll understand why the admiration for toxic men is a tragic misunderstanding, and why the rejection of good men is often about something they're not even aware they're missing. Let's get into it. Section 1. The poisonous plant. Confidence versus toxicity. First, we need to destroy the biggest myth. Women are not attracted to toxicity. No one wakes up hoping to find a partner who lies, manipulates, or creates constant emotional chaos. That's not the draw. So what's really happening? Think of it like this. Imagine a beautiful, exotic plant, vibrant colors, unique shape, absolutely stunning. You're drawn to it immediately. You're not drawn to the fact that it's secretly poisonous. That's just the hidden price you pay later. In dating, those vibrant colors are traits like unshakable confidence, assertiveness, clear purpose, and thrilling unpredictability. A man who owns the room, who goes after what he wants without apologizing, who doesn't constantly seek approval. These are universally attractive qualities. They signal strength and competence. The problem, these exact same traits, when stripped of empathy and integrity, become the building blocks of toxicity. Picture this. Two men at a bar. Man number one approaches confidently, holds eye contact, takes up space without apologizing for it, doesn't ask permission to exist. Man 2 is polite, asks if he's bothering her, constantly checks if everything's okay, apologizes for taking her time. Both might be equally kind people, but the energy is radically different. She goes home with the first guy, not because she wants to be treated badly, because confidence is intoxicating. Here's where it gets dark. A narcissist radiates supreme confidence because his entire reality is built around a grandiose sense of self. He doesn't doubt himself because he genuinely believes he's superior. A Machiavellian man is decisive because he sees people as chess pieces in a game he's determined to win. A man with psychopathic traits seems charming and fearless because he lacks the normal anxiety most people feel. No fear of rejection, no worry about consequences. At first glance, the mask of confidence is indistinguishable from the real thing. The woman isn't choosing toxicity, she's choosing what she perceives as strength. It's only later, once she's invested, once the dopamine is flowing, that she discovers the beautiful plant is poisonous. The confidence was arrogance, the assertiveness was control, the unpredictability was instability, and here's the other side, the gentleman. If attraction is to confidence, the rejection isn't about his kindness, it's about what's often perceived as a lack of backbone. The man labeled too nice is often seen as passive, indecisive, lacking drive. The rejection is of the weakness, not the gentleness. Section 2. The nice guy trap. The covert contract. And here's the part that's gonna sting. If you've ever thought, I did everything right, why did she choose him? You might be the problem. Not because you're too nice, because you're not actually nice at all. Let me explain. There's a massive difference between a man who is genuinely good and a man who is performing niceness as a strategy. This performance is called nice guy syndrome, and at its core is a toxic unspoken deal, the covert contract. It works like this. If I do all these nice things for you, listen to your problems, buy you coffee, always be available, then you OWE me a relationship, or affection, or sex. He's not being kind out of genuine goodness. He's inserting kindness coins into a vending machine, expecting a date to fall out. And here's what he doesn't realize. Women can feel this transaction on a subconscious level. It feels inauthentic, manipulative, suffocating. His kindness feels like a debt she never agreed to. When she inevitably fails to uphold her end of this secret bargain because she never signed up for it, the nice guy shows his true colors. The resentment boils over. He becomes passive-aggressive, bitter. I'm such a nice guy, and women only want jerks. But a truly good man doesn't keep score. His kindness isn't a strategy, it's his character. A good man says, I care about you, but I won't tolerate being disrespected, and means it. A nice guy says, whatever you want, and then resents her for it later. The rejection isn't about his gentleness. It's about the inauthenticity and the lack of a spine. Section 3. The childhood blueprint, attachment theory. Now here's where it gets deep. To understand why a smart, successful woman repeatedly ends up with toxic men, we have to go back, way back, to her earliest relationships. This is attachment theory, developed by psychologists John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. The idea is simple but profound. Your first bonds with caregivers create a blueprint for what love feels like. If you grew up with consistently loving, responsive caregivers, you developed secure attachment. You learned relationships are safe, that you're worthy of love. Securely attached people choose kind, reliable partners because stability feels like a blessing, not a bore. But the confusing pattern, the pull toward toxic men, almost always comes from insecure attachment. And it's not a character flaw, it's the echo of an early wound. Anxious attachment, the emotional roller coaster. Imagine a child whose mother is sometimes warm, sometimes cold. The child never knows which version is coming through the door. Fast forward 25 years, that woman's nervous system is trained for uncertainty. A stable man feels like waiting for a bomb that never explodes. It's unsettling, boring even. The toxic man? He's the explosion she's been expecting her whole life. The chaotic push-pull, intense affection followed by sudden withdrawal. Feels like home. The emotional roller coaster isn't passion, it's familiarity. Avoidant attachment, the suffocation fear. This forms when caregivers were distant or rejecting. The child learns independence is the only way to survive. As an adult, they fear being engulfed. A gentle, available partner who wants closeness feels needy or suffocating. An emotionally unavailable man, perfect. His distance gives them the space they crave. Disorganized, attachment, the trauma bond. This is the darkest pattern. The caregiver was both the source of fear and the only source of comfort. The child is trapped. The person they need for safety is the person harming them. It's like being terrified of fire but also freezing to death. You have to run toward the thing that's burning you. As an adult, this creates what psychologists call a trauma bond. They simultaneously crave and fear intimacy. They're drawn to partners who recreate this chaos, a phenomenon called repetition compulsion. The unconscious mind tries to replay past traumas to finally win an unwinnable game from childhood. The chemistry they feel isn't love, it's the chilling recognition of familiar pain. Section 4. The brain's slot machine, dopamine and intermittent reinforcement. If attachment theory is the psychological software, neurochemistry is the hardware it runs on. The pull toward a toxic partner isn't just in the mind, it's in the brain's reward pathways. The most powerful mechanism? Intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. It's not winning every time that hooks you, it's the unpredictability of the reward. A toxic relationship is the ultimate human slot machine. During the good times, when he's affectionate, attentive, loving, the brain gets a massive hit of dopamine, the pleasure chemical. During the bad times, when he's cold, distant, cruel, the brain craves that dopamine hit again. Withdrawal, longing, obsession. When he finally offers a sliver of affection again, the relief and dopamine rush are so intense, it feels like profound love. But it's not love, it's addiction. She's addicted to the cycle itself. The highs are only high because the lows are so devastatingly low. A stable, gentle partner who provides consistent love doesn't create these dramatic spikes. His love is a nourishing meal. The toxic partner's love is cocaine, and this is why she can't just leave. You're not asking her to leave a person, you're asking a cocaine addict to quit cold turkey. Her brain is chemically dependent on the chaos. The dark triad, fake confidence. This brings us to the dark triad, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Why are women sometimes drawn to these men? Because their toxic traits are cheap imitations of genuinely attractive qualities. The narcissist's self-obsession looks like unshakable confidence. The Machiavellian's manipulation looks like strategic ambition. The psychopath's lack of empathy looks like cool-headed charm and fearlessness. These are flashy lures designed to hook you fast. Only over time does reality emerge. The confidence is a fragile shell. The ambition leaves a trail of used people. The charm is a predatory tool. Section 5. Modern Amplifiers. How technology weaponizes these patterns. Now, if all of this attachment wounds, dopamine addiction, trauma bonds sounds bad enough on its own, here's the terrifying part. Modern technology has turned these psychological vulnerabilities into a business model. Dating apps and social media aren't just platforms for connection. They're dopamine slot machines specifically engineered to exploit the exact same mechanisms that make toxic relationships addictive. Let me show you how. The paradox of choice. Dating apps as infinite buffets. Think about traditional dating. You meet someone, you invest time getting to know them. You decide if there's potential. Now think about dating apps. You're presented with an endless stream of options. Swipe, swipe, swipe. Each face is a potential dopamine hit. Each match is a small reward. But here's what happens psychologically. The abundance of choice makes commitment feel like loss. Choosing one person means closing the door on thousands of others. So people keep one foot out the door, always wondering if someone better is just one swipe away. This creates what psychologists call relationship FOMO, the fear of missing out on a potentially superior option. The result? People become disposable. The moment someone requires effort or shows a flaw, it's easier to move on to the next match than to invest in working through challenges. And who thrives in this environment? The person who presents the most exciting, unpredictable profile. The one who creates instant chemistry and dramatic highs. The toxic partner wins because they're optimized for short-term dopamine hits, not long-term compatibility. The good man who reveals his value slowly through consistency and depth gets lost in the endless scroll. Instagram highlight reels, the illusion of perfect love, now add social media to the mix. Everyone's relationship looks perfect online. Romantic getaways, surprise gifts, passionate declarations of love. What you don't see, the fights, the manipulation, the tears behind closed doors. A woman in a stable, healthy relationship scrolls through Instagram and sees her friend's boyfriend planning elaborate surprises, posting poetic captions, creating movie-worthy moments. Her own relationship, built on quiet consistency, shared routines, comfortable silence, suddenly feels boring by comparison. She doesn't realize she's comparing her behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. And here's the dark twist. Toxic relationships often create the most dramatic social media content. The breakup-makeup cycle, the grand gestures after betrayals, the intensity that photographs well. The chaos creates content, the stability doesn't. So women start to believe that real love should feel like a constant emotional movie, when in reality, healthy love often feels like coming home after a long day. Peaceful, safe, unremarkable. Algorithmic validation, training brains for instant gratification. Finally, consider how social media has rewired our brains for instant validation. Post a photo, get likes within seconds, dopamine hit, send a message, get a reply immediately, dopamine hit. We're training our nervous systems to expect instant emotional rewards. Now put that person in a relationship with someone who takes time to respond thoughtfully, instead of immediately, shows love through consistent actions rather than dramatic gestures, builds trust slowly instead of creating instant intensity. That person feels slow, boring, insufficient, not because they are, but because our brains have been conditioned to crave the instant hit. The toxic partner who love bombs with constant attention creates dramatic ups and downs and provides that addictive intermittent reinforcement. He feels like the algorithm, fast, intense, unpredictable. He's not a better partner, he's just better optimized for a dopamine-addicted brain. The cultural narrative, passion as chaos, and finally there's the cultural story we've been sold about what love should look like. Every movie, every song, every romance novel, the narrative is always the same. Real love is chaotic, passionate, all-consuming. It's the bad boy who changes for the right woman. It's the emotional roller coaster that proves the depth of feeling. Stability is portrayed as settling. Calm is portrayed as lack of spark. We've romanticized the exact patterns that psychology tells us are toxic. So when a woman experiences that chaotic intensity with a toxic man, she thinks, this must be real love. It feels just like the movies. When she experiences peace with a good man, she thinks, something must be missing. The culture has taught her to mistake anxiety for attraction and chaos for chemistry. This is why breaking these patterns is harder than ever. It's not just about healing childhood wounds or understanding brain chemistry. It's about consciously resisting an entire technological and cultural system designed to keep you addicted to the wrong things. But here's the empowering part. Once you see the game, you can stop playing it. Section 6. The good man, redefining strength. So where does this leave the kind, gentle man who feels invisible? The answer is not to become more toxic. That's a race to the bottom. The solution is a fundamental rebrand. The goal is not to be a nice guy. The goal is to be a good man, and there's a world of difference. 1. Kindness with a spine. A good man is genuinely gentle and empathetic, but his kindness is a choice backed by strength. He has firm boundaries. He can say no without guilt. He doesn't tolerate disrespect, not out of arrogance but self-respect. His gentleness isn't weakness, it's power under control. 2. Authentic confidence. A good man's self-worth comes from within. It's forged through integrity, values, and keeping promises to himself. He doesn't need to put others down to feel tall. He doesn't need constant validation. This is the kind of confidence that creates safety, not anxiety. A good man has purpose. He can plan a date, make a decision, lead when necessary, not from a place of control but competence and care. He's not waiting for permission to live his life. He's building something worth joining. This is the assertiveness that's missing from the nice guy and is genuinely attractive. 4. Emotional stability. A good man is a safe harbor, not a stormy sea. His consistency is his superpower. He understands that real passion isn't built on a chaotic dopamine roller coaster. It's built on the slow, steady burn of trust and genuine intimacy. He is the nourishing meal, not the addictive drug. And while some may be too accustomed to the drug to appreciate the meal, those ready for true health will find him to be exactly what they were always looking for. Conclusion: the path forward. If you're a woman watching this and thinking, "This is me," you're not broken. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do. The first step isn't fixing yourself, it's understanding the pattern. Recognizing that the chaos feels like home doesn't mean you have to keep living there. And if you're a man who's been called too nice, you're not too nice. You're not nice enough to yourself. Build the spine first, develop authentic confidence, create firm boundaries, have a purpose beyond getting her approval. The kindness becomes powerful after that. The confusing pull toward toxic men is rarely about the toxicity itself. It's a complex web, woven from mistaking false confidence for real strength, the powerful echoes of childhood wounds, the addictive chemistry of an emotional roller coaster. The rejection of the gentleman is often not a rejection of kindness, but a turning away from passivity and the inauthenticity of trading niceness for affection. For women caught in these cycles, this knowledge is the light on the path out. It's a chance to heal old wounds that make chaos feel like home and retrain the brain to find peace and stability. For men, the message is empowering. Don't abandon your kindness, fortify it with strength. Build a foundation of authentic self-worth so your gentleness becomes a powerful gift, not a plea for validation. Evolve from the nice guy into the good man. Breaking these patterns allows everyone to connect on the basis of who they truly are, not the ghosts of their past or the deceptions of brain chemistry. It opens the door for relationships built not on chaos but on shared peace, respect, and authentic love. What's your take on this? Have you seen this pattern play out in your own life, either as the person caught in the cycle or watching someone you care about struggle with it? Share your story in the comments below. The more we share, the more we all learn. And if this video gave you a new perspective, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of modern relationships. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.